My name is David Lombardi. I am 57 years old, with completely white hair and sky-blue eyes that once sparkled with intellectual confidence. And now, after everything I've experienced, look at the world with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. I have been teaching philosophy for 32 years, the last 17 in the same high school in Milan, where the impossible happened, where I hit rock bottom in my arrogance, and where, paradoxically, I was saved. What I am about to tell you is the story of the most shameful and most beautiful day of my life. The day I provoked a 14-year-old boy, asserting with the confidence typical of the ignorant that God does not exist. And the day when, a few seconds later, literally a handful of seconds that contained an eternity, I repented so deeply that my life split in two. There is David before that moment, and there is Davide after. Two completely different people who share only a body and a name. But for you to truly understand what happened, I must take you back in time. I must show you who I was, what I thought, how I had built this armor of certainties that I believed indestructible. I must tell you the story of the man who believed he had all the answers, when in reality he had not even understood what the real questions were. I was born in Milan in 1960, into a bourgeois family in the Porta Venezia area. My father was a lawyer, my mother a literature teacher. Both were practicing Catholics, with that religiosity typical of the upper Milanese bourgeoisie. Mass on Sundays, family lunches, respect for traditions, but without excesses of mysticism, an orderly, reasonable, socially acceptable faith. I had been baptized, had my first communion, confirmation. I attended catechism without particular enthusiasm, but also without rebellion. It was simply what one did. The first real shake-up came in high school, when I read Nietzsche for the first time. I was 16 years old, attending the Beccaria Classical High School, and my philosophy teacher, a short, bald man with thick glasses and a contagious passion for ideas, had us read "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." I still remember the exact moment when I read the phrase, "God is dead." I didn't immediately understand what it really meant, but I felt something move inside me. It was as if someone had opened a door to a forbidden room, and I was irresistibly drawn to enter. I began reading everything I could find on atheism, agnosticism, criticism of religion. Feuerbach, Marx, Freud. I devoured books like a starving man, and each page reinforced this idea that was growing in me. Religion was an illusion. A consoling illusion, perhaps, but still an illusion. God was a human invention, a way to give meaning to a universe that had no meaning. And I, who believed myself smarter than average, could not continue to believe in childish fairy tales. At 18, when I entered university, I openly declared myself an atheist. My parents were shocked. I remember the conversation at dinner one November evening in 1978. My father had just served the wine. My mother was bringing the risotto alla Milanese to the table. "Dad, Mom," I had said with the unconscious confidence of adolescence, "I have to tell you something. I don't believe in God anymore. I think religion is a deception, and I don't want to pretend anymore." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. My father slowly put down his glass. My mother sat down, the serving spoon still in her hand. "Davide," said my father in a controlled voice, "you're young. You're going through a phase. It will pass." "It's not a phase," I replied with that stubbornness that now, looking back, I recognize as pure immaturity masked as intellectual depth. It's the result of months of study, of reflection. I've read Nietzsche. I've read Marx. Religion is the opium of the people. It's an instrument of social control. My mother began to cry. "How can you say these things? We raised you in the faith. We gave you the best example." "And that's exactly the problem," I interrupted her. "You imposed a faith on me without ever asking if I truly believed in it. But I'm not a child anymore. I can think for myself." From that evening, my relationship with my parents was never the same. They continued going to Mass, I stayed home to study. They prayed before meals, I waited with barely concealed impatience for them to finish. It was as if I had built a wall between myself and them. A wall made of books, theories, philosophical arguments that I used as bricks. I graduated from the State University of Milan with the highest honors, with a thesis on the critique of religion in Friedrich Nietzsche. The professor who supervised me was himself a declared atheist, and he guided my research with enthusiasm. 150 pages, in which I systematically demolished every argument in favor of the existence of God. The ontological argument, the cosmological one, the teleological one. I felt invincible, armed with logic and reason against the superstitions of centuries. I immediately found work as a teacher, first in a scientific high school in the suburbs, then, after some years, at the Marcelline Institute, a private Catholic school in the center of Milan. It may seem paradoxical that a militant atheist would teach in a religious school, but in Italy, these incongruities happen. Private schools need qualified teachers, and I was very qualified. My students achieved excellent results on exams, families were satisfied, and as long as I didn't openly attack religion, and I was careful not to do so too directly, I could coexist with the nuns who ran the school. But I was sneaky, I admit it now. I never said openly, God does not exist in class. I was too clever for that. Instead, I insinuated doubts. When we studied Thomas Aquinas, I dwelt more on objections to his proofs of God's existence than on the proofs themselves. When we talked about ethics, I always presented Kant as if he had demonstrated that morality did not need God. When we dealt with the Enlightenment, my enthusiasm for Voltaire and his fight against the infamous was palpable. Meanwhile, I had gotten married. Julia was a sweet, serious, believing girl. We had met at a dinner with friends when I was 30. She taught mathematics in a middle school. She was beautiful, with long brown hair and always smiling brown eyes. I fell in love with her despite her faith, or perhaps precisely because of it. There was something fascinating about her serene certainty, her inner peace that I had never known. When I asked her to marry me, she was clear. She wanted a church wedding. I hesitated. Julia, I don't believe. It would be hypocritical of me. She took my hands. I know, Davide, but I believe. And marriage isn't just for you or just for me. It's for both of us. Can you do it for me? And I, in love and perhaps a bit arrogant in thinking that over time I would convert her to my atheism, agreed. The wedding was beautiful. The priest who married us, Father Andrea, was a kind man who didn't ask too difficult questions during the premarital meetings. I recited the formulas, promised what I had to promise, and then tried to forget the whole affair and focus on my new life with Julia. But religion remained a constant point of friction. Julia wanted to go to Mass every Sunday. I preferred to stay in bed with coffee and a book. She prayed before meals. I waited, drumming my fingers on the table. When our daughter Emma was born in 1985, Julia wanted her to be baptized. I gave in, thinking it was just a harmless ritual, a cultural tradition without real meaning. And then what happened that definitively broke the thin thread that still connected me to the possibility of faith. My father fell ill. Lung cancer, advanced stage. He was only 59 years old. He had smoked since he was 20, and now the bill was arriving, merciless and inexorable. The 2 years that followed were hell. I saw my father, that strong and confident man who had been my role model, reduced to a shadow. Cancer was devouring him from within. Chemotherapy made him sick in ways I never would have imagined possible. He vomited for hours, lost his hair, lost weight until he looked like a walking skeleton. And the pain. God, the pain. Despite the medicines, I heard him scream at night, in the ward of Niguarda Hospital where he spent entire weeks. And I prayed. Oh, how I prayed. Even though I already deeply doubted God's existence, I prayed with the desperation of one who has nothing left to lose. I would kneel beside my father's bed when he slept, sedated by morphine, and I would beg, "God, if you exist, heal him. I promise anything. I'll return to church. I'll believe. I'll do whatever you want. Just heal him. Just make him stop suffering." Silence. No answer. No sign. Only the monotonous beep of the machines, my father's labored breathing, the smell of disinfectant and illness that permeated everything. My father died one August morning in 1987, at 6:32. I was there, holding his hand. I saw life extinguish in his eyes like a candle, and in that moment something extinguished in me too. If God existed and had allowed a good man, a loving father, to suffer so much and die so young, then God was a monster. And if God did not exist, as seemed increasingly evident to me, then all that suffering was simply absurd, meaningless, useless. At the funeral, in the church of San Babila, where I had been baptized 47 years earlier, I listened to the priest talk about God's mysterious ways and suffering that purifies, and I felt a glacial rage grow inside me. What God was it who used cancer to purify? What heavenly Father was it who watched a man scream in pain and did nothing? From that day, my atheism was no longer just intellectual. It became visceral, personal, angry. I no longer simply did not believe in God. I hated him. I hated the very idea of him. And all those who believed in him seemed to me either naive or hypocritical. This anger colored all my teaching. I became more aggressive in presenting atheist positions. When a student defended the faith, I looked at him with a mixture of compassion and contempt. "You're young," I thought. "You haven't seen enough suffering yet. When you do, you'll understand." In the years that followed, my marriage to Julia cooled. She continued to pray, to go to Mass, to try to involve me. I closed myself more and more in my study, surrounded by philosophy books, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Yes, I had started smoking after my father's death, as a challenge to a God who wasn't there. Writing articles for small cultural magazines, in which I attacked religion with a pen dipped in poison. Emma, our daughter, was growing up in the middle of this tension. Julia took her to catechism. I refused to participate in religious ceremonies. When she made her first communion in 1993, I was physically present but spiritually absent, sitting in church with crossed arms and a barely concealed expression of disgust. And so we arrived at 2004. I was 44 years old. I had been teaching for 19 years. I was known among colleagues as an excellent teacher, but also as a difficult, closed, cynical man. My students respected me for my preparation, but feared me for my cutting sarcasm. I was alone, even though surrounded by people. Alone in my anger. Alone in my certainty that the world was an absurd place governed by chance and suffering. It was in this state of mind that, in September 2004, I met Carlo Acutis for the first time. It was the first day of school. The third middle grade section B consisted of 22 students, all 13-year-olds excited and nervous about the start of the new year. I entered the classroom with my usual detached attitude, put my bag on the teacher's desk, and began explaining how the philosophy and history courses would be organized. While I was speaking, my gaze fell on a boy at the third desk in the second row. Dark, curly hair, deep eyes, a serious but not severe expression. While all the other students were chatting with each other, he sat composed, hands joined on the desk, and looked at me with an attention that immediately struck me. It was not the anxious attention of the student who wants to make a good impression. It was something different. It was as if he was truly seeing me, beyond the mask of the teacher, beyond the words I was saying. "You," I said, pointing at him. "What's your name?" "Carlo Acutis, Professor," he answered in a clear voice. "Nice to meet you." His Italian was impeccable, with a slight Milanese accent. "Good, Carlo. I hope this year will be fruitful for all of us." He smiled, a simple, clean smile, and nodded. In the months that followed, I couldn't help but notice Carlo. He was different from the other boys. While they got distracted easily, watched the clock counting the minutes to the end of the lesson, doodled on their notebooks, he was always focused. He took neat notes, asked intelligent questions, and in his essays showed a depth of thought unusual for a boy his age. But there was something that deeply irritated me. His faith, every piece of his work, every intervention of his oozed Catholicism. When we talked about Plato and the world of ideas, he made parallels with heaven. When we discussed ethics in Aristotle, he brought up the theological virtues. When I explained Augustine, he didn't just repeat the lesson, but passionately defended every position of the saint, as if he knew it intimately. "Carlo," I asked him once, after he had turned in a particularly beautiful essay, but pervaded with religious references, "do you go to Mass often?" "Every day, Professor," he replied naturally. "Every day?" I repeated incredulously. "But you're a 13-year-old boy. Don't you have other things to do?" He smiled. "I go before school starts. There's a Mass at 7 in my parish. And no, I don't have anything more important to do. Jesus in the Eucharist is the most important thing in my life." I was baffled. A 13-year-old boy saying that Jesus in the Eucharist was the most important thing in his life. Not with hypocrisy, not to make a good impression, but with total, absolute conviction. "I understand," I said, but in my head I thought, this boy has been too influenced. Someone has brainwashed him. It's a shame, with such a brilliant mind. As the school year progressed, my annoyance with Carlo grew. Not because he was a bad student, on the contrary, he was excellent. Not because he was rude, he was always respectful, kind. But precisely because his faith seemed so authentic, so rooted, so real. He was a mirror that reflected everything I had rejected, everything I had fought, everything I was angry about. I began to provoke him subtly. When I explained atheist philosophers, I looked at him directly. When I presented criticisms of religion, I raised my voice, became more emphatic. I wanted to see a crack in his armor of faith. I wanted to see him doubt, waver. But it never happened. He listened attentively, noted everything down, and then, when he expressed his opinion, he did so with the same calm, the same serene certainty. I talked about him with Julia one evening at dinner. "I have a student who goes to Mass every day," I said with a sarcastic tone. "A 13-year-old boy who says that Jesus is the most important thing in his life. Can you believe it?" Julia looked at me with a sad expression. "And you think that's wrong?" "I think it's tragic," I replied. "A boy with such a good brain, wasted on medieval superstitions. Or perhaps," she said gently, "he has understood something that you refuse to see." I got up from the table without answering, closing myself in my study with a whiskey and Dawkins' latest book. And so we arrived at that March morning in 2005, a morning that would change everything. It was a Wednesday. I remember it was Wednesday because the evening before, I had corrected the tests on Plato's Republic, and I always returned them on Wednesdays. It was raining, that annoying drizzle typical of Milanese spring, that slowly soaks you without you noticing, until you're drenched. I had woken up in a bad mood. I had argued with Julia at breakfast about something trivial that I don't even remember now. Emma had been rude when I asked her to help with the dishes, and the tests I had corrected the night before were mediocre, full of banal errors, obvious misunderstandings. I arrived at school wet and angry. Sister Margarita, the principal, greeted me in the hallway with her usual smile. "Good morning, Professor Lombardi. How are you?" "Fine," I lied. She looked at me with that look that religious women have, as if they see more than what you show. "Remember that this afternoon we have the faculty meeting," she said. "Of course," I replied with a sigh. Another hour wasted listening to pedagogical banalities. I entered the teacher's lounge, poured myself a coffee from the machine, lit a cigarette — at that time you could still smoke in teachers' lounges — and began mentally reviewing the day's lesson. Third middle grade B, second hour. Enlightenment, Voltaire, criticism of religion. Good. I was in the perfect mood for that lesson. When the bell rang, I took my bag and headed toward the classroom. The hallway was full of students running, laughing, pushing each other. "Slow down!" shouted another nun, trying uselessly to impose order. I passed through all that adolescent chaos with the expression of someone who is above it all, the teacher who looks down on the confusion of the young. I opened the door to classroom B. The students were almost all already seated, although they continued to chat noisily. "Stand up," I said in a loud voice. The noise subsided. They stood up, some faster, others dragging their feet. "Good morning, Professor Lombardi," they said in chorus, with various degrees of enthusiasm. "Good morning. Sit down." I took off my wet coat, hung it on the chair, put my bag on the desk with a thud that made some students jump. The classroom smelled of chalk, old books, adolescence closed in a space too small. The windows were fogged from the rain. The light was gray, sad. The radiator under the window puffed weakly, providing insufficient heat. I looked at the class. 22 faces stared at me with various degrees of attention. Martina at the first desk, already ready with her notebook open and pen in hand. Luca and Giovanni in the back, exchanging knowing glances, probably planning some prank. Sarah and Chiara, two inseparable girls, whispering something in each other's ears. And Carlo, at the third desk in the second row, sitting composed, hands joined on the desk, looking at me with those dark, deep eyes that seemed to see too much. "Well," I began, opening the register, "I have here your tests on Plato's Republic. I must say I'm quite disappointed with the results." A murmur of anxiety went through the class. Many of you have shown that you understood absolutely nothing about the allegory of the cave. Some wrote completely absurd things. For example, and here I took a test at random, someone wrote that the prisoners in the cave represent modern youth distracted by technology. Where did you read this nonsense? The owner of the test, a shy boy named Federico, blushed deeply. "I thought of it myself, Professor," he murmured. "Well, you thought wrong," I said brusquely. "Plato didn't even know what modern technology was. The allegory of the cave talks about the difference between appearance and reality, between the sensible world and the world of ideas. It has nothing to do with smartphones." I began distributing the corrected tests, calling students one by one. The grades were not good. Many 5s, some stretched 6s, few 7s. "Carlo Acutis," I called. Carlo stood up and came to get his test. I looked at him. 8.5, of course. His essay was well written, deep, articulate. The only problem, from my point of view, was that he had interpreted Plato's world of ideas as a prefiguration of Christian heaven. "Nice work," I told him with a tone that implied an unexpressed but. "But?" he asked, perceptive as always. "But not everything has to be traced back to religion, Carlo. Plato was a philosopher, not a Christian theologian." "I know, Professor," he replied calmly, "but I can't help seeing the connections. Truth is one, isn't it?" I looked at him. That phrase, "truth is one," said with such confidence by a 14-year-old boy. It deeply irritated me. "Truth," I said with a sarcastic smile, "is much more complicated than that, but go back to your seat. We'll talk about it later." When everyone had received their tests, I returned to the desk. "Today," I said, "we begin a new topic, the Enlightenment. Can anyone tell me what enlightenment means?" Several hands went up. I pointed to Martina. "The century of reason, Professor, the 18th century, when philosophers began using reason to criticize superstitions and dogmas." "Exactly," I said, pleased. the century of lights, when humanity finally began to emerge from the darkness of medieval ignorance. I wrote some names on the blackboard: Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, Kant. These are some of the main Enlightenment philosophers. Today we'll focus on Voltaire. Has anyone heard of him? Some hands went up, hesitantly. Voltaire, I continued, was one of the most brilliant thinkers of his time. He wrote hundreds of works, defended religious tolerance, fought against fanaticism and superstition. His most famous phrase is, "Écrasez l'infâme," crush the infamous. Does anyone know what he meant by the infamous? Silence. Then Carlo raised his hand. Of course. Yes, Carlo? He meant the Catholic Church, Professor. Or more generally, religious fanaticism. Correct, I said. Voltaire saw organized religion, particularly the Catholic Church of his time, as a source of oppression, ignorance, violence. And he wasn't entirely wrong, considering the religious wars, the Inquisition, the persecution of heretics. While I spoke, I walked among the desks. I felt growing inside me that familiar sensation, that subtle pleasure I felt when presenting criticisms of religion. You see, I continued, the Enlightenment represented a turning point in the history of Western thought. For the first time, philosophers and scientists dared to say, perhaps traditional truths are not so true after all. Perhaps miracles have natural explanations. Perhaps God himself is a human invention. I noticed that Carlo had stopped writing. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disapproval. It was sadness? Compassion? Something wrong, Carlo? I asked, stopping right in front of his desk. No, Professor, he replied gently. Please continue. But his tone, that gentleness, irritated me even more. It was as if he was patiently tolerating a capricious child. Who was he to look at me like that? Voltaire, I continued, raising my voice, was a deist. He still believed in a creator God, but a distant God who didn't meddle in human affairs. Not the personal God of Christianity, who supposedly listens to prayers and performs miracles. Voltaire believed that this type of God was an invention of priests to control the people. I stopped again in front of Carlo's desk. And he was right, in a sense. If we look at history with a critical eye, we clearly see how religion has been used to justify every kind of horror. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the wars of religion, all done in the name of a God who, if he really existed, should be horrified by these atrocities committed in his name. But Professor, Carlo said in a calm but firm voice, it's not God's fault if men misuse religion. It would be like blaming science for atomic bombs. Ah, I said with a triumphant smile. But there's a fundamental difference. Science corrects itself. If one scientist makes a mistake, other scientists correct it. Religion, on the other hand, is based on blind faith, on the acceptance of dogmas that cannot be questioned. That's not true, Carlo replied, and in his voice there was still that exasperating calm. Faith also has its reason. Saint Augustine said, "Credo ut intelligam," I believe in order to understand. And Saint Thomas Aquinas demonstrated that faith and reason can coexist perfectly. Oh yes? I said, and I felt my voice become harder, sharper. And tell me, Carlo, did Saint Thomas ever empirically demonstrate the existence of God? Or did he just build sandcastles of logic that collapse at the first breath of doubt? The class was completely silent now. Everyone felt the tension growing. Some students looked at me, others at Carlo, like spectators at a tennis match. St. Thomas's proofs, Carlo said, are not sandcastles. They are rational arguments based on observation of the world. Rational arguments? I laughed. Carlo, tell me something. Have you ever really read these arguments? Or do you just repeat what they tell you in the parish? I saw a flash of pain cross his eyes, but his voice remained steady. I've read them, Professor. The Summa Theologica, the Confessions of St. Augustine, the City of God. Not all of them completely, obviously. They are very long texts. But yes, I've read them. At 14? I said incredulously. Really? And you understood them? Some parts, yes. Others, less, he admitted. But that doesn't mean they're not true. I felt something break inside me. That humility, that ability to admit his limits while defending his faith, made me lose my temper. Why did this boy have something I no longer had? Why did he seem so at peace, so certain, while I, with all my years, my studies, my experience, was full of anger and bitterness? Carlo, I said, and my voice now had a dangerous intonation that some more attentive students recognized. Tell me something. When you read all these saints and doctors of the church, doesn't it ever occur to you to doubt that maybe, just maybe, they're only building elaborate mental edifices to justify something that doesn't actually exist? What do you mean, Professor? He asked, though I knew he had understood perfectly where I was going. I mean, I said, and now I leaned on his desk, looking down at him, that perhaps all these beautiful words, all this complex philosophy, all this sophisticated theology, are based on a fundamentally false assumption. What assumption? He asked, though his eyes told me he already knew the answer. And I, David Lombardi, 45-year-old philosophy professor, family man, man who should have been mature, wise, professional, said the words I would want to take back for the rest of my life. The words I will always be ashamed of having uttered. The words that paradoxically were the catalyst for my salvation. The assumption that God exists, Carlo. I paused, looked at the whole class, making sure everyone was listening to me, and then continued in a clear, loud voice. Because you see, God does not exist. He is a human invention, a way to give meaning to a universe that has no meaning. It's the consoling answer we invented when we were still too primitive to have science to explain the world to us. But now we know better. Now we know that there is no old man with a beard in the sky watching us and caring about us. There is no afterlife, no heaven, no hell. There is only this world, random and indifferent. And when we die, we simply cease to exist. Everything else is fantasy, illusion, self-deception. The silence that followed those words was total, absolute. You couldn't even hear the students breathing. The rain against the windows seemed to have stopped. The radiator had stopped puffing. It was as if the entire universe had held its breath. I looked at my students' faces. Some had their mouths open in shock. Others seemed confused, trying to process what they had just heard. Martina, the girl at the first desk, had tears in her eyes. Federico, the shy boy, stared at his desk, red in the face. Sarah and Chiara were holding hands, frightened. And then I looked at Carlo. And what I saw took my breath away, even though at that moment I didn't fully understand it. Carlo didn't seem shocked. He didn't seem angry. He didn't even seem disappointed or offended. He looked at me with an expression that even today, 12 years later, I struggle to describe with adequate words. It was love. Pure, unconditional, incomprehensible love. Not for my words, those had certainly hurt him, but for me. For the person I was, under all the arrogance, under all the anger, under all the defenses I had built. He saw me. He saw the pain I carried, the anger for my dead father, the spiritual loneliness that consumed me. And he felt compassion for me. Slowly, without saying a word, Carlo stood up. The movement was so natural, so devoid of dramatization or theater, that no one thought to stop him. The other students looked at him, then looked at me. I remained there, leaning on his desk, waiting. Part of me wanted him to yell at me. Another part wanted him to remain silent so I could claim my intellectual victory. But both parts knew that Carlo would do neither. Carlo looked me straight in the eyes. He didn't have to look up much. He was already quite tall for his age, and I was bent toward him. His dark eyes met my sky-blue eyes, and in that eye contact I felt something I hadn't felt in 17 years. I felt the presence of something greater than me, greater than both of us, greater than that classroom and that school and this life. And then Carlo spoke. His voice was calm, clear, without a trace of anger or judgment. "Professor," he said, "I deeply respect your right to think whatever you want. I'm not here to judge you or condemn you, but I must tell you, with all respect and all the humility I'm capable of, that you are wrong." He paused, not for dramatic effect, but simply to collect his thoughts. Then he continued, "God exists. He truly, concretely, really exists. Not as an abstract idea, not as a philosophical concept, not as a mental construction, but as a living, loving presence that cares for every single person on this earth." His voice became even gentler, but also firmer. "And Professor, the most important thing I must tell you, the thing I hope you will carry in your heart, even if you decide not to believe it, is this: God loves you. He loves you intensely, unconditionally, completely. He loves you now, in this moment, exactly as you are. He loves you even if you don't believe in Him. He loves you even if you say ugly things about Him. He loves you even when you feel unworthy of being loved." I felt something break inside me. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but like when a dam begins to give way. First a small crack, then a larger one, then another, until the whole structure you've built so carefully to protect yourself begins to crumble. "Carlo," I began, but my voice broke. My throat closed. My hands began to tremble. Carlo took a step closer to me. "Professor," he said gently, "I look at you and I see a lot of pain. I see anger, but beneath the anger I see suffering. Something happened in your life, something that hurt you deeply, and you responded to that wound by deciding that if God existed and had allowed that suffering, then either God is cruel or God doesn't exist. And since the idea of a cruel God is unbearable, you chose to believe that God doesn't exist." How did he know? How could this 14-year-old boy see so clearly inside me? It was as if every defense I had, every armor, had become transparent before him. "But Professor," Carlo continued, "what if there was a third possibility? What if God existed and was good, but suffering existed anyway, not because God wants it, but because He gave us free will? Because He created us free, capable of loving but also of suffering. Because without the possibility of suffering, there could not even be the possibility of true love." Tears began to stream down my cheeks. Tears I hadn't shed since my father's death. I tried to speak, to defend myself, to maintain at least a fragment of my professional dignity. But I couldn't. All words were blocked. All the philosophical arguments I had accumulated in years of study had dissolved like snow in the sun. Carlo said one more thing, and it was this phrase that completely destroyed me, that pulverized every residue of my resistance. "You are angry with God for something that happened, Professor. I see it in your eyes every time we talk about faith. Maybe you lost someone you loved. Maybe you prayed and thought God didn't listen. But you know what? That pain you carry, that anger, that loneliness, God can transform all of this into something beautiful, precious, if only you let Him. If only you open your heart and say, 'Here I am, I'm here, I'm angry and hurt and full of doubts, but here I am.' And in that moment, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to make it understandable to those who haven't lived it. I felt something. No, I didn't feel. I knew. I had an absolute, undeniable certainty, stronger than any philosophical proof, more real than any empirical evidence. God existed. God was there, in that classroom, in that moment. God was as real as the air I breathed, as the beating of my heart, as the tears on my face. And God loved me. He loved me despite everything, Despite 17 years of militant atheism, despite the terrible things I had said about him, despite having influenced hundreds of students away from faith, he loved me as a father, loves a son who has gone astray, but is finally coming home. My legs gave way. They literally gave way. I leaned heavily on Carlo's desk to avoid falling, then let myself slide down to sit on the floor, my back against the desk, my head in my hands, sobbing like a child. I heard the students move, heard worried voices. "Professor, what's happening? Is he sick?" But they were distant, as if coming from another world. Carlo knelt beside me. I felt his hand rest gently on my shoulder. "It's all right," he said in the sweetest voice. "It's all right, Professor. God is here. You feel it, don't you?" I nodded, unable to speak. "He's always been here," Carlo continued. "He's always waited for you. It doesn't matter how far you ran, how much you denied his existence, how much you fought against him. God always waited for you, like the father of the prodigal son waited on the road for his son's return." I finally managed to lift my head, to look at Carlo through the tears that blurred my vision. "How do you know?" I whispered in a broken voice. "How can you know all these things? You're just a boy." Carlo smiled, that pure and simple smile I had seen hundreds of times, but only now truly understood. "I don't know, Professor. It's Jesus who knows. I'm just, how can I say, like a telephone wire. The message comes from him, I only transmit it." He helped me up from the floor. My legs were still trembling, but I managed to stand. I looked at the class. All the students stared at me with expressions of amazement, confusion, some with tears in their own eyes. Martina was crying openly. Sarah and Chiara were hugging each other. Even Luca and Giovanni, the two jokers, seemed shaken, serious for the first time since I had known them. "I'm sorry," I said in a trembling voice. "I'm so sorry. I should never have..." What I said was wrong. It was terribly wrong. Carlo gently guided me to my chair behind the desk. I sat down, still trembling, uselessly wiping the tears that continued to fall. "You don't need to apologize to us, Professor," Carlo said. "We're just kids, but maybe you would like to talk to him." And he indicated upward with a simple nod of his head. I nodded. Carlo returned to his seat. He sat down, but continued to look at me with those eyes full of compassion and love. The rest of the class remained silent. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if everyone perceived that they were witnessing something sacred, important, even though they probably didn't fully understand what. I don't know how long I sat there with my head in my hands, crying silently while a revolution was happening inside me. Because it wasn't just that I had believed in God again. It was that I had encountered God. I had felt him really, concretely. And nothing, no philosophical argument, no scientific evidence, no logical reasoning, could ever erase that experience. Finally, the bell rang for recess. The sharp sound broke the spell of the moment. The students stood up slowly, gathering their books and notebooks with uncertain movements. Some approached me. "Professor, are you okay?" Martina asked in a worried voice. "Do you need us to call someone?" No, I managed to say. "I'm fine, thank you. Go ahead to recess." They left slowly, still giving me worried glances. Carlo was the last. He stopped at the threshold, turned toward me. "Professor," he said, "if you want to talk, I'm here. And also Father Giorgio, the school chaplain. He's a good, wise man. You can trust him." Then he added with a shy smile, "And Jesus is always in the Eucharist, in the school chapel. That's where you'll truly find him, not in words or reasoning, in his real presence." When I was alone, I stood up with still trembling legs and went to the window. The rain continued to fall, but now it seemed different to me. No longer annoying, but purifying, as if it were washing away 17 years of anger and pain. I looked at the school courtyard, the wet trees, the gray sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I no longer recognized. Peace. Not euphoric happiness, not excitement. Just a deep peace, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I could barely teach the other classes. The fourth-year high school students immediately noticed that something was wrong. "Professor, do you feel okay?" a girl asked. "Do you have a fever? Do you want to go home?" "No, I'm fine," I lied, though it wasn't entirely a lie. I was fine in a way I couldn't explain, but I also felt like I might faint at any moment. When the last lesson finally ended, instead of going directly to the teacher's lounge as I usually did, I found myself walking through the school corridors. My legs took me, as if they had a will of their own, to the small chapel on the first floor. I had never entered it since I had been teaching there, except during the mandatory assemblies at the beginning of the school year when all teachers had to be there. I opened the door. The chapel was small, intimate. Dark wooden pews, a simple altar covered with a white cloth, some candles. The walls were white, with only a crucifix and some icons. There was a smell of incense and wax. And there, on the golden tabernacle at the center of the altar, a small red light shone, the sign of the real presence. I sat in the last pew. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't even remember the prayers of my childhood anymore. I felt ridiculous, like an adult trying to relearn to walk after years spent in a wheelchair. But Carlo had said that Jesus was there, and after what I had just experienced, I could no longer doubt. "I don't know where to start," I whispered in the silence of the chapel. My voice sounded strangely loud in that empty space. "I don't even know if I'm doing this right, if I'm saying the right things. It's been so many years. I've said such terrible things. I've led so many people away from you with my words, with my example. How can you still want me?" Silence, but not an empty silence, a full silence, pregnant with presence. And within that silence I felt, not with my ears, but with something deeper, an answer. Not words, but a certainty. "I've always wanted you. I've waited for you every day. Welcome home." The tears began to fall again, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of shame or pain. They were tears of relief, of liberation, of joy so intense it was almost unbearable. "If you really want me," I said in a trembling voice, "if you really love me despite everything, then here I am. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to live this new reality. But here I am. Take me, use me, transform me. Make of me what you will." I stayed there. I don't know how long, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. When I finally came out, it was almost dark. Sister Margarita, the principal, was in the hallway, probably worried that someone was still in the school. "Professor Lombardi," she exclaimed, seeing me come out of the chapel. "You're still here?" I thought everyone had left. "I was in the chapel," I replied, and the words came out naturally without embarrassment. She looked at me carefully. Her eyes, trained by years of religious life to read souls, saw something. "Something happened today, didn't it?" she asked gently. "Yes," I admitted. "Something extraordinary. Do you want to talk about it?" "Maybe," I said, "but not now. I need to process everything." She nodded understandingly. "Do you know Father Giorgio, our chaplain?" she asked. "Carlo Acutis mentioned him," I replied. "Ah, Carlo," Sister Margarita said with an affectionate smile. "That boy is special, isn't he? There's something saintly about him." "Yes," I agreed, still amazed to be using that word, saintly, without sarcasm. "There really is something saintly. Father Giorgio comes here every afternoon from 4 to 6 for confessions," Sister Margarita said. "If you wanted to talk to him, I'm sure he would be very happy." I hesitated, then took courage. "Do you think Do you think he would have time tomorrow? I'll talk to him, she said with a warm smile. I'm sure he'll find the time. That evening, when I returned home, Julia was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Emma was in her room doing homework. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, but I felt as if I had just returned from another planet. Davide, Julia said, seeing me enter. You're late. Where were you? I put down my bag, took off my coat, and looked at her. My wife, whom I had disappointed so many times, who had patiently endured my years of anger and atheism, who had continued to pray for me even when it seemed useless. Julia, I said, and my voice trembled, I have to tell you something. Something incredible happened today. She put down the spoon she was using to stir the sauce, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at me with concern. What happened? Are you okay? I'm better than I've ever been, I said. Come, sit down. We sat at the kitchen table, that same table where we had eaten thousands of meals in 17 years of marriage, where we had argued and made up, where I had proclaimed my atheism, and she had endured with pain. And there, holding her hands, a gesture I hadn't made in months, maybe years, I told her everything. The provocation I had made to Carlo, his words, what I had felt, the tears, the chapel, the peace I now felt inside. As I spoke, I saw her eyes fill with tears. When I finished, she said nothing for a long moment. Then she whispered, in a voice broken with emotion, I prayed for this, Davide. I prayed every single day for 17 years. Never, never would I have imagined it would be a 14-year-old boy who would bring you back to faith. Never would I have thought that God would use one of your students. She stood up, came to me, and hugged me. And I hugged her back, holding her tight, crying on her shoulder, as I hadn't done since my father's death. Forgive me, I said through sobs. Forgive me for all these years. Forgive me for being so arrogant, so closed, so angry. Forgive me for making you suffer. Shh, she said, stroking my hair. You're here now. You've come back. That's all that matters. The days that followed were strange, difficult, wonderful. The next day, during lunch hour, I went to talk to Father Giorgio. He was a man in his 60s, with white hair and kind eyes. When I told him what had happened, he listened without interrupting me, nodding occasionally, and at the end simply said, The Holy Spirit works in mysterious ways. And young Carlo, that boy has a special gift. We began a series of meetings that lasted weeks. Father Giorgio never tried to convince me of anything. There was no need. I had already believed. But I needed to understand what this new faith meant, how to live it, how to reconcile myself with the church I had fought for so long. He gave me books to read. No more Dawkins and Hitchens, but Lewis and Chesterton and Newman. He explained the sacraments, the liturgy, the theology of suffering that made so much sense now that I had opened my heart. With Carlo, I developed a special relationship. In the weeks after that episode, we often stopped to talk during recess. He was never presumptuous or proud. In fact, he seemed almost embarrassed when other students mentioned what had happened. It wasn't me, Professor, he always told me. It was Jesus. I'm just an instrument, a telephone wire, as I told you that day. He told me about his passion for the Eucharist. You see, Professor, he told me once, his eyes shining with that light I now recognized as love for Christ. In the Eucharist, there is everything. It's God making himself small for us, giving himself completely. It's the greatest miracle, which happens every day, in every church in the world. How can we not believe when we see so much love? He told me about the project he was working on, cataloging all the Eucharistic miracles in the world, creating an exhibition that could help people believe. Many think that miracles are things of the past, he said. But it's not true. God continues to perform miracles every day. We just often don't see them because we don't look with the eyes of faith. I completely changed my way of teaching. I didn't become a catechist. I continued to teach philosophy. But I stopped presenting atheism as the only intellectually valid position. When we talked about Nietzsche, I also explained the criticisms that Christian philosophers had made of his ideas. When we dealt with Sartre and atheistic existentialism, I also presented the Christian existentialism of Marcel and Kierkegaard. I tried to be objective, to show that intelligent and rational people could believe in God without betraying their rationality. Some colleagues noticed the change and murmured, "Lombardi has become a bigot," I heard someone say once in the teacher's lounge. But I didn't care anymore. I had discovered something infinitely more precious than the respect of my atheist colleagues. I had discovered the truth, that Easter was the most beautiful of my life. After 17 years, I confessed, it was terrible and wonderful at the same time. I had to admit every single thing. The times I had mocked the faith, the times I had led students away from God with my sarcastic words, the years of pride and anger, the hatred I had nurtured toward God after my father's death. Father Giorgio listened to me with infinite patience, then said the words of absolution. I literally felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders, and at Easter Mass, in that same church of Santa Maria Segreta, where my father had been buried 18 years earlier, I received the Eucharist. Carlo was there with his family. When our eyes met as I returned from receiving communion, tears streamed down my face again. He smiled at me and gave a small nod as if to say, "See, Professor? I told you that you would find him here." And he was right. In the Eucharist, I truly found the real presence of God that I had felt for the first time in that classroom, amplified 1,000 times. Every time I received the body of Christ, I felt the same certainty, the same love, the same peace. Carlo Acutis died in October 2006, just 18 months after that day in class that had changed my life. Fulminant leukemia. It was diagnosed on October 1st, and he died on the 11th. 10 days. Only 10 days. When I learned of his illness, I went to visit him at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. He was in a small room, pale, weak, with tubes attached everywhere. But his eyes, those beautiful dark eyes, still had that same light. "Professor," he said in a feeble voice when he saw me, "how nice that you came." I sat beside his bed, took his hand. It was so small, so fragile. "Carlo," I said, and my voice broke. "Why? Why you? You're so young. You have so much to give the world." He smiled. "Don't cry, Professor. I'm about to see Jesus face to face. How could I be sad? All my life I desired the Eucharist, to be close to him, and now I will see him directly without veils anymore. It's the most beautiful moment." "But we need you," I said, tears falling freely. "No," he said gently. "You have Jesus. He's the one you need, not me. I'm just a normal boy who loved Jesus. But you, Professor, you can continue to witness to him, to speak of him. That's your mission now." He died 2 days later at 6:45 in the morning on October 12th. His mother called to tell me. I cried as I hadn't cried even at my father's death, but I also cried with gratitude. This boy, this saintly boy, had saved me. He had shown me the way home. His funeral was on October 14th in the church of Santa Maria Segreta. The church was packed, hundreds of people, schoolmates, teachers, parishioners, family friends. I was there in the front row with Julia and Emma. I looked at the small white coffin, thought about everything Carlo had given me in such a short time, and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. Today, 12 years later, I continue to teach philosophy, but I am a completely different man. I go to Mass every day, as Carlo did. I pray before the Eucharist whenever I can. I have developed a new relationship with my wife, based no longer only on human love, but also on shared faith. Emma, our daughter, grew up seeing this transformation and is now a young woman of deep faith. And when I teach, when I talk about philosophy and religion, I always tell this story. I tell it to my students every year. I tell them about the day when, with the arrogance typical of the ignorant, I told a 14-year-old boy that God does not exist. And I tell them how, a few seconds later, literally a handful of seconds that contained an eternity, I repented so deeply that my life split in two. Because Carlo didn't demolish me with brilliant philosophical arguments. He didn't threaten me with hell. He didn't judge me or condemn me. He simply loved me. He looked at me with the eyes of Christ and told me the simplest and most powerful truth in the world. God loves you. And in those few seconds, 10, maybe 15 seconds that lasted forever, I understood that it was true. God loved me. He had always loved me. He had waited for me for 17 years, patient as only God can be. And when I finally opened even just a small crack in the wall I had built around my heart, He entered like a river in flood, sweeping away 17 years of anger, pain, and pride. Now, when I see a young student with that same light in their eyes that Carlo had, that same unshakable faith, I think of him and whisper a prayer of thanksgiving. Thank you, blessed Carlo Acutis, for saving me. Thank you for having the courage to speak the truth with love. Thank you for showing me Christ, because this is the truth I learned that day, the truth I now carry in my heart every moment of every day. God exists. God is real. God is love. And God uses the most improbable ways, like a 14-year-old boy in a philosophy class in Milan, to reach the hardest and most lost hearts, even mine. If this story has touched your heart, if you too are struggling with doubts or anger toward God, I beg you, give God a chance. Do what I did in that chapel 12 years ago. Simply say, "Here I am. I don't know if you're there. I don't know if you love me, but here I am. If you want me, take me." And then wait. Listen. Because God always answers. Perhaps not in the way you expect. Perhaps not when you expect it. But He always answers. And remember the words of blessed Carlo Acutis. We are all born originals, but many die as photocopies. Don't be photocopies. Be original. Be yourselves, fully, completely, as God created you. And let the Eucharist, that daily miracle Carlo was so in love with, be your highway to heaven. Every year, on October 12th, the anniversary of Carlo's death, I go on pilgrimage to Assisi, where his body rests. I kneel before his tomb in the sanctuary of the Renunciation and thank him once more. I thank that extraordinary boy who had the courage to speak the truth to an arrogant professor, who looked beyond my anger and saw the pain that caused it, who loved when it would have been easier to judge. And every time I see his serene eyes in the photo displayed next to the tomb, those same eyes that looked at me with so much love that day in class, I cry. I cry with gratitude. I cry with joy. I cry for the miracle that God performed in my life through him. Because this is the real message I want to leave you. It doesn't matter how far you've gone. It doesn't matter how much you've denied God, how much you've fought against Him. God is waiting for you. He waits with the infinite patience of a father who loves his children. And when you finally return, even if it's just to say, maybe you're there, maybe not, but here I am, He will welcome you with open arms, as He welcomed me in those few seconds that changed everything. A few seconds in which I passed from arrogance to repentance, from atheism to faith, from spiritual death to life. A few seconds that were enough for God to completely transform a heart that believed itself invincible in its unbelief. Because God can work miracles even in the hardest hearts. Even in mine. If this testimony has touched your heart, entrust yourselves to the intercession of blessed Carlo Acutis in your prayers. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell to discover other stories that illuminate and strengthen our faith.